about a year before I overdosed and tried to suicide, I got the opportunity to hear a man named Rip Esselstyn speak about something that I had never heard of at the time, which was a plant-based diet. Now, I'd heard vegan before, but I'd never heard the term plant-based diet. I was there at this event with him for like 5-6 days with him and people like Dr. Michael Clapper and Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn and Doug Lyle and Jeff Novick. And they were talking about the use of what I call nutritional technology, using food as a technology to reorganize your health. And that if you could live in an environment that looked like a low-fat, fiber-rich, plant-based diet, you could reclaim your health. And at the time, I thought, you know what, here's the deal. I don't know shit about nutrition. I don't know anything about health. I certainly don't know how to care for my body with food, but I do know one thing. I know how to put food on a plate and eat it. What I want to do is let me just try this plant-based thing. Let me try this thing that Rip had talked about at this retreat. Let me see if it works. I don't know. Maybe it will. And I decided what I wanted to do was, instead of not use drugs, I wanted to replace drug use with plant-based nutrition. Something I like to describe as active recovery. Instead of trying to not use, which was what I would call passive recovery, I wanted to actively replace my use with healthy plant-rich meals 3 times a day. Instead of organizing my life around what I use, how much I use, when I use, where I use, I wanted to organize my day and my life around what I eat, how much do I eat, when do I eat, where do I eat, so that my life is organized around self-care acts. I wasn't allowed to do that in the rehab hospital. They were not about to let me change my diet. So I moved into a sober living facility after 37 days of rehab. And in fact, the facility is about 5 blocks from where we are right now, on the beach here in Santa Monica. And I check in, and there's about 12 other guys there in their 20s, and they're all trying to do the same thing as me. They're all trying to figure out how we're going to do this thing called life without our drugs anymore. And I walk into the kitchen, and in this place you're allowed to choose what you want to eat. You write out a list of foods, and they send someone to the grocery store every week, and they bring back those foods, and they stock the kitchen. And man, this kitchen looked like it had been stocked by nothing but teenagers watching Nickelodeon commercials from the 90s. I mean, it was just like Hot Pockets and string cheese and Fruity Pebbles, and which Fruity Pebbles is the best cereal of all time. But I remember I walked up to the house manager, whose last name is literally Hamburger, and told him that, look, what I really want to do is I want to do this plant-based thing. Here's a list of foods. I think it's so great that I can honestly say that my plant-based journey started with a hamburger. And at the time, I really didn't know much about plant-based diets. I had been to this thing. I remembered what they talked about. So I had a list that was about this big. It was like 5 items: oats, potatoes, beans, rice, and a couple of sauces. And that's what he got for me. And I got up the next morning, and I was crazy motivated. Like, I was really inspired. I was going to do this thing. And I go to the pantry, I open it up, and there right next to my oatmeal is a box of Fruity Pebbles. And as I mentioned, Fruity Pebbles is the greatest cereal of all time. It is still the best, most tasty cereal you will ever eat in your life. And I got furious, like throwing shit at people, and ran out of the house. And it was a wild scene. And the assistant house manager is a guy named Luke Chittick. He ran after me, and he grabbed me by the shoulder. I was running down Venice Boardwalk. I don't know where I was going. I just needed to be somewhere else. And he was like, dude, what in the world just happened? All I know is I saw you go in the kitchen to make breakfast, and the next thing I know, you're throwing a fit, throwing shit at people, and then you ran out of the house. And I was so angry that I couldn't answer this question. Why in the world did this feel hard? I knew what I wanted to do. I knew how to do it, and I had the tools to do it, and yet I didn't want to do it. Why? Why couldn't this whole thing simply be a matter of intellect and will? Knowing what to do, wanting to do it, then you do it. I don't know why it felt so hard to make that choice. It felt so hard to say, not Fruity Pebbles, yes oatmeal. And I didn't get it. And I felt like a failure. I felt like that was an indication of how the rest of my life was going to feel. And I got very scared. And so I responded by being scared, and I got angry, and I ran away. And I came back and started to think about, was there any way I could help figure this out? And that's when I remembered Doug Lisle. And Doug Lisle is the co-author of a book called The Pleasure Trap with a Dr. Alan Goldhammer. And he also gives a TED Talk called The Pleasure Trap, which describes the biological mechanism that compels animal behavior. And I watched this 17 minutes, and I will tell you to this day, nothing has had more of a profound impact on my ability to change my life than those 17 minutes. After those 17 minutes were over, I felt unbelievable relief. What he explains in The Pleasure Trap is that there is a biological mechanism built into our DNA that operates as a guidance system that tries to help us figure out what's the right move to make in any given environment. But this guidance system has been crafted and tuned over the course of our evolutionary story, which, as I mentioned earlier, we spent 99% of it in environments of scarcity, competition, and danger, where the best psychology to occupy is a psychology of trying to get the most for the least, a psychology that wants more for less. If you can figure that out, you're going to win. But over the last 50 to 100 years, our environment has made a radical shift to where now we went from an environment of scarcity, competition, danger to an environment of abundance and ease and convenience. And our psychology and our motivational architecture has no understanding that this shift has occurred. Our compulsion, our motivation is still to try to get the most for the least. But in the modern environment, we end up making decisions that we think and feel are biologically successful when in fact they're self-destructive. And the way that we feel like things are biologically successful is dependent by how much dopamine they produce.